What's up YouTube, Capital G here. We're talking artifacts in this video and their place in the meta. Now when I say meta, I'm talking about post Breaker of Shadows, and I say that because I'm not really sure that there's a point of discussing pre-Breaker of Shadows anymore. I believe the sneak peek is like this weekend, so there's really not much of a point of talking like Breaker of Shadows isn't basically out because it for the most part already is. So I think that artifacts are going to be one of the major anti-pendulum, I guess, techs or like players in the format. And if you look around, people are pretty much realizing if you're not running a pendulum deck, that one of the quickest ways to kind of beat pendulum decks is to go to one of these huge anti-pendulum cards. The biggest two that most people will identify with and can probably think of immediately are Naturia Beast and obviously Anti-Spell Fragrance. And it's like if your deck can't make one, then you can probably like incorporate the other. And sometimes you have to, add in a couple of tech things like maybe a glow up bulb or Palomaro or something like that. Anti-Spell Fragrance is something where you may have to adjust some of the spells in your deck, convert them to traps, etc., etc. But I feel like artifacts they're a good way to incorporate anti-pendulum into decks where maybe you can't run those things because while anti-spell is kind of easy to get into a deck, Naturia Beast isn't quite easy. I mean, like if you don't have the earth targets, it's kind of hard to make the card, or if you just don't have any tuners and glow up bulb doesn't fit well into your deck because you don't run like level 4s, then it's just not going to work. Cosmos is a prime example. Now I could have made this video maybe 3-4 weeks ago when I first started seeing artifacts kind of splashed into like a bunch of different decks, and I saw people kind of experimenting, but I was like, I want to kind of make sure that this isn't a fad because like I don't know if this can be consistent enough, but I'm not going to be one of those people who is just like, well, I was wrong, so I'm just not going to I'm not going to basically acknowledge it when it's become a thing, because artifacts are now starting to become a thing. Now, I mean, the engine and for the most part artifacts kind of center around, well, new artifacts, they center around these 4 cards. It used to be in the past that Bagaltech was like a major player in the engine, but that was mainly because Moraltech was at 3. If you guys remember about last year Nationals, I mean, like Hat was one of the biggest decks. It won Nationals. It kind of like dominated the top 8 cuts, and it's because Moraltech was so powerful. It could be used during your opponent's turn. It didn't target. It destroyed back row and monsters. And if you move it towards this format, like, I mean, it pretty much just it's a play disruptor, but it also can crack pendulum scales. And now we've got Artifact Scythe, which is I would say, when the Duelist Alliance era came out, I don't think that this card would have been that good, because other than, I mean, you can't, I mean, I guess you could have like played it to stop like an Exceed summon, or maybe like maybe a synchro with like Yang Zing, but for the most optimal play to try and get any like 1-for-1 out of it would have been to chain it to like a Shadow play, like a Shadow Fusion or something like that. But it really just wasn't that common. And again, that was right about the time that the artifact engine got kind of fractured by Moraltech's limitations. So that's one of the reasons you really haven't seen artifacts popping up here and now. But right now, it makes a lot more sense, and it makes more sense because pendulum decks are more like the way that they use their extra deck is much more like, it's much more impactful than a Satellar Knight going Altair, Deneb into Castel or something like that. I mean, if you like Scythe that, okay, you stop one Castel, they still keep their monsters, no harm, no foul. But if you do this play against maybe a pendulum deck, after like turn 2, chances are a lot of their resources are committed face up in the extra deck, and if they can't get them out, if you're playing a deck like Cosmo, which is where you're seeing artifacts splash a lot, you can probably just kill them that next turn, as they don't really have any monsters. So there were a multitude of players playing this at the ARG Orlando. They were playing like Cosmos plus artifacts. I don't think every single one that made the top cut was, but I know Jeff Jones, a couple other players were playing this. It synergizes really, really nicely in Cosmos, and I think that people are dropping the reasoning bill, which I never really liked to begin with, for either hand traps or artifacts, because if you look at Cosmos, you always, when you build Cosmos, have about like 6 to 7 kind of tech spots that can be whatever you want. Like you can throw reasonings and like gold sarcophagus in there. You can throw like Maxis and maybe some like Ghost Ogre so that you can make Black Rose. But a lot of people are looking at the artifacts because obviously This guy, Play Disruptor, spot removal, doesn't target. If you summon it from the graveyard or the deck, it will trigger. This guy kind of being like a one turn. You can't use your extra deck for opponents. And it synergizes super good with Cosmos because, well, about half of the deck is light. You guys know that. Most people play honest and don't really side it out. These guys, all the artifacts, to my knowledge, are all light. So obviously you don't really have to worry about that there. You also have a level 5 that you never side out in Slip Rider. So obviously you can make like really good rank 5 XC plays. Probably like the best two are Pallades and Volcasaurus. I put those down here. Volcasaurus obviously being able to do like big burn damage. If your opponent doesn't have damage juggler, a lot of times you can game them. And then the Monarch Stormforth, like a lot of Cosmo players will side this. So when people side in like Iron Wall, you can play Monarch Stormforth. You can tribute for Slip Rider, pop the what's it called, the Iron Wall. But in addition, if you ever like Crazy Brick or something like that, you can use Monarch Stormforth to try and tribute these. And specifically in this deck, and this is why they're so popular right now in Cosmos. It used to be like if you draw artifacts, like, oh my god, this is so terrible, I can't summon these things, you know what I mean, I have to set them or whatever. But if you look at like in Cosmo, if you summon a Slip Rider during your turn, you can pop your own, during your opponent's turn, you can pop your own artifacts to summon them. So like there's no guarantee that, you know, if you're like, even if your opponent doesn't have like any back row, there's no guarantee you still can't wreck them with Slip Rider by popping like a Morale Tech and then summoning Morale Tech to like crack one of their pendulum scales. Then you've got 2/5s, you've got damage, you've got XC plays, and a lot of people post Breaker of Shadows are going to be playing Twin Twister. So I think that these are definitely good because, I mean, you guys have all seen that Vine on my channel, like, you know, when your opponent blind MSTs a Sanctum, like it might start being a thing where you just don't want to blind MST or you don't want a Twin Twister back row. And Cosmos, like if they put these cards back there, you never know what's a real trap, what can be a solemn notice, and what can be an artifact. So it might be, you know, a measure to stop your opponent from using those Twin Twisters. It's not like you're not gonna Twin Twister a Cosmo Town. That's just dumb. You know what I mean? But if you Twin Twister a Sanctum, like, do you know how fucked you are? You could lose your entire pendulum scale because you did that. So I think that artifacts are definitely gonna have a place in the meta, and I don't think that it's just going to be limited to Cosmos. I actually think that right now you could probably build some very good versions of I don't really know what to call it. I wouldn't necessarily call it basically something like what Corey McDuffie ran, where you're running like trap tricks and artifacts, because we've just spoken about how good the artifacts are as an anti-pendulum engine. But if you look at a card like Trap Tricks Murmillo, she didn't actually get power creeped. Even though people stopped really playing her after Duelist Alliance came out, it was mainly about the cards that she searched. It wasn't about her, the actual card. The main two cards that people were searching most of the time were Bottomless Trap Hole and Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare. And when you went to the Duelist Alliance era, those cards just weren't really that good. Like there were a lot of trigger summons, you know what I mean? And a lot of things Bottomless just wasn't that good against. If you played Bottomless against a Teller Knight deck, okay, I summoned Deneb, you Bottomless, okay, I still get the Surge. You can't even use Bottomless on Deltaros. If you played it against Shadows, you know, you couldn't even Bottomless Winda. If you Bottomless Construct, it still triggered. You couldn't Bottomless Dante. A lot of the Burning Abyss monsters were too small to Bottomless anyways. And then Trap Tricks Trap Hole Nightmare suffered the same problems. And in this format, obviously, it wouldn't be like viable to run this card because too many things like like Cosmos ships that would trigger, and Magic Specters can't even be destroyed by this card, so that's a wash. But we do have Space Time Trap Hole, so you could easily just mix in 3 copies of like Murmillo, maybe 3 Space Time Trap Holes, a Bottomless, and we've got Rafflesia, which is just going to empower your plays. So it's like, this is kind of a good time for like not Trap Tricks, but yeah, excuse me. This is actually a good time for Trap Tricks to make a comeback because of how powerful Space Time Trap Hole is, because we're getting Rafflesia in this set. So, you know what I mean? I don't think that there's going to be a better time. And I think if you combine all of this, maybe with some anti-spell fragrances, like a lot of these Pendulum decks, I mean, how you gonna play? Like, if I go turn 1, summon Murmillo, get me like a Bottomless, flip over an anti-spell, maybe have like a Sanctum set, you basically can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Even if I don't have the anti-spell, if I get a Space-Time Trap Hole and I've got like a Sanctum plus like an Ignition, you're probably not gonna Pendulum summon that turn. I can probably use Morale Tech and something like that, maybe Bop a Scale, use Ignition on like the other one. So I just want to get everybody's thoughts on artifacts, because I think that they will be the third big kind of anti-pendulum thing that we have this format. The first, of course, being Anti-Spell Fragrance, and then the second being Naturia Beast. But I think artifacts are really good. I think that they can be used in Cosmos, or you can kind of mix them into other decks. But like the kind of like Hat of 2015, you might be able to bring that back, just not without the hands. I don't think the hands are really that great anymore. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always.